day one of brief when I tried out for being a ranger, they said, men, rangers are not soldiers. Rangers are motherfucking killers. My question was, First Sergeant, are vegan options available?
Hey everyone, this is Ryan from Ethics Fitness, and this is Season 3 of the Ethics Approach podcast, the podcast where we highlight incredible vegan athletes, nutritionists, and other influential and inspiring vegans in the community and find out what they do to absolutely kill it on a plant-based diet. If you haven't already, please give us a follow anywhere you're listening to this, and feel free to check out the other content I'm producing on ethicsfitness.com, including the ethics coaching services, merch, articles, free training programs, and YouTube videos. Also, feel free to check out my personal fitness Instagram at TofuStrong for more podcast updates and additional content. Creating content like this is a huge passion of mine, and I greatly appreciate any support along those lines. All of my links will be in the description, and thank you so incredibly much for all of the continued love and support. In this episode, I'm thrilled to welcome a guest who embodies the spirit of strength, resilience, and compassion, Bill Muir, or as many of you know him, Sergeant Vegan. Bill's story is as inspirational as it is multifaceted. A vegan since 1992, a combat veteran, a registered nurse, and the author of Vegan Strong, along with several other works. He's a true testament to the power of living with purpose. In this episode, Bill takes us on a journey through his incredible life. We'll talk all about his early days in the punk and hardcore music scene and how it influenced his decision to go vegan, what it was like being plant-based in the U.S. Army, and how the vegan landscape has evolved over the decades. But that's not all. Bill's talents stretch far beyond vegan advocacy. As an RN specializing in cardiac telemetry, he reflects on how his experiences in the U.S. Army shaped his journey toward a career in nursing. We'll also dive into his work as an author and hear about his other pursuits, including his time living in Japan, voice acting, and even contributing to the Final Fantasy X soundtrack. And of course, Bill will open up about his future goals and his advice for those looking to live a more purposeful, plant-based life. Whether you're here for inspiration, practical tips, or just a great story, this episode has it all. Without further ado, let's get into it with the unstoppable Bill Muir. All right, what's up, guys? This is Ryan with the Ethics Approach podcast, and today I'm joined by Bill. Bill, I'm going to try to get your last name right. Muir?
Muir.
Muir. Okay. Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on, man. You have a really exciting life story that I'm really excited to hear about. You've been vegan for a super long time, and I think that alone is really cool to hear about. I've been vegan for going on 9 years now, but you've been vegan for most of your life. And I'm really excited to hear about that. So thank you for coming on, man. Do you want to do a quick little elevator pitch for yourself, and we'll get into the details in a second?
Sure. So Bill Muir, registered nurse, combat veteran, vegan 32 years, also in a punk rock band.
I love that, dude. And you've done a lot more than that too. We're going to get into all that too in a second, but that's a really good quick overview. So let's start first of all with what led you to veganism. So I'm assuming you went vegan in your teens?
That's correct. I went vegan at 19. So I basically bumbled my way into this whole thing. At 18, I got a flyer at a punk rock show about the importance of not eating meat, and that kind of stuck. And then later on into that journey, I got another PETA flyer at a punk rock show about the damage that dairy does to cows, and it kind of cemented something. I was like, holy shit, am I accidentally doing something awesome? I hadn't meant to go vegetarian in the first place. I went vegetarian kind of as a jerk to piss off my parents, because they asked me to give up something for Lent. And I was like, what would really annoy these people? Because I was a little bit of a jerk at 18 years old. And
yeah, of course.
When I said I was going to give up meat, there was a lot of concern. As you could guess, nowadays, most people would consider not eating meat for 40 days like a healthy cleanse. But back in the day, that was something something revolutionary, and that was something crazy. And as time went on, and I didn't die like everyone was saying that I was going to, I thought, hey, is it possible that I've actually chosen something awesome, and am I doing something Amazing. Well, no one else but myself thought so at the time because, pre-internet, the idea of not eating animals was just not even out there, not even a concept. And then when it was something that mainstream media and movies would basically make fun of us. We were the brunt of all the jokes.
Yeah.
And as time kind of went on, it kind of evened out until now. There's movies, documentaries like Game Changers, where it suggests, is it possible that eating vegan is even more healthy than eating animals? So it's been an excited run, and it's kind of exciting to be able to be here for the change.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot has changed through that time, obviously, which I'd love to ask you about in a second. But to go back to kind of like the influence on of music. So obviously, like punk and like anarcho punk and everything was huge in like the 80s and 90s. I guess particularly like the late 80s, early 90s. I think so, based on what I know. But are there any specific bands that were kind of like catalysts with their vocals or anything like their what they're talking about that kind of led you to look more into it?
So none of them led me to go vegan because I went vegan before I had heard any specific band that was specifically championing vegan lifestyle or even a vegetarian lifestyle. However, not to plug it, but I'm going to plug it. Moby, for those who've heard of Moby, most people have heard of
Hmm.
Moby, has a movie called Vegan Punk Rock Movie, which is free on YouTube and you should watch if you haven't. Lays out the whole cause for punk rock and veganism since, I would even say that he goes far as back as the 70s. For me
Wow.
personally, I had already gone vegan when I started listening to bands that might have brought it up, but there was one band in particular, a band called Earth Crisis, which is still around today,
Yep.
that really crystallized the feelings that I had about the importance for not killing animals and destroying the planet and put into words the anger that I had that people were just so ridiculous and couldn't change.
Do you feel like a lot of that energy from that scene back then is reflected in the music you do now?
Well, thank you very much for that question as well. Yeah, I would like to think my band that follows closely DFC Mosh on all the socials, follows in that same tradition. And scenes come, scenes go. Music is always going to be music, but I would like to think that we continue and carry on some of that tradition and some of that awesomeness that I grew up with. But I mean, it's very, very different too. When I was doing music the first time around as a 25-year-old,
Hmm.
that was the only thing in my life. And, being in a mosh pit was potentially the craziest thing that I would ever experience. And now as a 51-year-old, it's far from that. I mean, I've been to war. I used to jump out of planes for a living, and now I work as a telemetry RN. And so, music is more my escape and usually the least crazy thing that I might do in a week.
Yeah, that that makes sense. It's also a very good outlet. Like I don't know about you, but whenever I'm like in the gym or something, my favorite thing is to shut out the whole entire world and just blast some old like black metal stuff or like something with a lot of like energy and like just deep rooted like rage behind it.
I would recommend checking out if you haven't already Firestorm from Earth Crisis. That
Yeah.
or maybe Hatebreed Smash Your Enemies. As Smash Your Enemies is actually my go-to for the plank. I do 2 minutes of plank a
Mhm.
couple times a week, and I listen to that. It's pretty good breakdowns, and it's you don't want to listen to Shiny Happy People from REM while you're trying to really get some stuff done.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Anything with the most kind of energy behind it is usually what I go for. I do like Earth Crisis a lot, and I do like I'm very interested in general in a lot of those older like punk and hardcore bands and how veganism was so niche back then. But I feel like they really revolutionized a small niche of the population back then who was very into that kind of music. Like nobody was vegan back then, as far as I know, but there was a lot of people who were into that music and they really got into it. Is that kind of how you saw it? Like, was it mostly that scene or was it anybody else too?
Well, vegan, when, so from my experience, vegan back in the day was just hippies
Uh
and
huh.
then punk rock kids. There were only two groups. And if you weren't a hippie or you weren't punk rock, you might not have even heard of the word vegan. Like, I don't know how
Uh
that
huh.
would have even come up. Uh, it wasn't until I moved to LA, maybe 20 years after that, that I met a whole bunch of yoga people who are basically neo hippies who are also
Yeah.
vegan,
Uh
and
huh.
people who were not exposed to punk rock, and then after that, people that weren't even hippies who were vegan. It really is the internet that's had this movement transcend music and scenes from back in the day. Because if it wasn't for the internet, it really would still be just whoever was in your local scene and whoever you were able to hand a pamphlet to and said, "Hey, man, stop eating animals." Otherwise, these thoughts, these different ways of thinking wouldn't have had any reason to be exchanged. It
Yeah.
really has just been the internet and people having these conversations back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
and all these great documentaries coming out, and then you know celebrities who go vegan, and then a whole bunch of people go vegan when Lizzo goes vegan, and then a whole bunch of people stop being vegan when Lizzo stops being vegan.
Yeah.
That and products. Had it not been all for all these great vegan products, I assure you that without really good, soy milk and vegan
Yeah.
chocolate bars and ice cream, I would say if people had to endure some of the dark days, like where they're like, no ice cream, pizza with no cheese, crackers for a meal, I think there would there would have been very few vegans.
Yeah. Let's touch on that a little bit more. I'm really interested in. So you went vegetarian at first,
Yeah,
and that obviously back then was it was a big thing. Like you said, like cutting out meat was kind of rare even back then, just being vegetarian.
oh yeah.
So how long were you vegetarian for before you finally learned enough about going vegan? And I assume you went vegan for it sounds like the morals of it, like the
A
animals
hundred, a
mainly.
100% the animals.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit for the environment, though I don't
Yeah.
think we quite knew how awful. Because I already went vegetarian. I went vegetarian sometime in my first semester of college, and by the summer I had gone vegan. I would know the exact date, except nobody would have wanted to hear that I was vegan, so I just kept that shit to myself. And
Yeah.
I don't have an official date. Sometime in August of 1992, I was
Okay.
I was officially vegan, though I don't know if I probably didn't tell my parents that. I don't think I told friends that. Nobody would have wanted to hear it. I probably when I was uh, back at school in LaSalle in September of 1992, I probably had a few conversations about that. But even then, I don't think there were any other vegans for me to really bounce that back and forth with.
Yeah. Did you know anybody else back then who was vegan?
No.
Wow.
No, I didn't. I had first heard the word vegan when a girl that I was dating before I was vegetarian said that either her ex-boyfriend or her boyfriend was vegan, and that's when I had first even heard the concept. But I never associated with him. I mean, not for anything negative, but it just
Yeah.
wouldn't have had any reason to hang out with that dude.
Hmm.
And it was just I don't know. That's one of the things that I think, not to segue too much into
Hmm.
talking about college. I think one of the many advantages of going to school and university is just letting you be exposed to a whole bunch of different ideas. And whether
Yeah.
that's like different religions you might never have heard about, you know, or a different way of life, I think it's amazing to be able to have those experiences. And you could get that too by, traveling or living abroad or,
Hmm.
just changing towns. But I think those exchanges of ideas are really important in, not just in your education, but making a fuller life.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that everybody, this is obviously said a lot, but I think that everybody should travel at least a little bit, or like live in a city for a little bit, just be exposed to more people and more cultures. And I think that I mean, I couldn't imagine my life if I stayed in my hometown. Like I'd be a totally different person.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, I nothing against Philadelphia, but since I was raised there, I've been to almost every state and almost 50 countries, and it's just been amazing to be able to see what so many different people do in the world, and talk to so many people, and being able to realize that so many people think differently than we do here in the States.
Yeah, for sure. And that's interesting. I didn't know you grew up in Philly. I grew up in like Bucks County suburbs area.
Oh yeah, I'm from an area called Lansdowne or Drexel Hill.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I definitely know where that is. So I'm sure we have even more in common that we could relate to about that in general. I know my hometown. Well, I don't. I also don't want to get off track too much there. I could definitely go off. But let's talk a little bit more about your college experience. So you were vegan in college. Did you? I feel like a lot of people who end up in the military. I guess I'm kind of surprised that you were already in college. I assume you were in college before the military, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
So I graduated university in 1995 and I went in the military in 2003.
Okay.
So pretty good amount of time separating
Mm-hmm.
the two. And had it not been for 9/11, I don't believe I would have joined the military. There wasn't a natural progression moving toward that. If at the point
Mm.
where I joined the military, it would have been more normal for me to just stay in Japan, since I've been living in Japan for about 7, almost 8 years at that point.
Oh
And
wow.
so weirdly, leaving Japan and joining the military was at that point in my life the strange option.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe the more interesting option as well. Definitely not the easy option. The easy option
Yeah.
would have been just to keep doing what I'm doing and
Mm-hmm.
get better at that. Maybe I don't know, keep working in Japan, living in Japan,
Mm-hmm.
moving toward fluency. Instead, leaving Japan, joining the military, as an like an E4, and then starting my whole life over again was probably the most ridiculously interesting option I could have chosen. Both interesting in that it makes a good story later, and
Yeah.
ridiculous in that that's not usually the choice somebody knocking on 30 years old makes.
Mm-hmm.
But it made sense at the time in some weird way.
Yeah. Was it specifically 9/11 that I assume
Yes.
it must have made some sort of like did it almost make you feel like it evoked the patriotism in you in a way where you're like,
It was a lot of that. And I think a lot of it too was living abroad for so long. I didn't
uh-huh.
really feel, I don't know what an American feels like, even though we're Americans and we live in America. But
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, not living in America for so long, I kind of, you start to see I mean, you're reminded every day that you're not American and that you're an other, but you start to kind of see yourself as the society would think of their selves, because you're immersed in something. It's like, like for example, a dog will see themselves as a member of the family, not as a dog.
Uh-huh.
And you see yourself as like one of the other people that are living wherever you're living, and not just an other. You're like, oh, I'm doing this, and you start to lose a little bit of whatever being an American is.
Yeah.
And I think when we got attacked, it evoked a what the fuck in me that I wasn't expecting to have.
Mm-hmm.
And it also felt kind of like the end of the world, like watching America burn. It just hurt. And then I thought, and it probably for the same reason that I went vegan, because I wanted to change the world and make the world a better place. I thought, if I really put my money where my mouth is, because I care about our country, if I was a medic and was able to go there and actually hands-on
Mm-hmm.
help people and save people's lives, that it would make sense.
Yeah.
And maybe that I'd be able to do a better job than, just a kid right out of high school who had signed up for college.
Yeah.
And And that was the thinking. It was absurd. I'm not in no way does it make conventional sense because I would say it was definitely a rough life to be vegan and basic training, and it was
Uh-huh.
definitely rough to be vegan in Afghanistan. And it wrecks your body in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
Is it worth it? I don't know. Life is a series of temporary events. It's not a permanent thing anyway. So
Hmm.
it wasn't like I was planning on living forever to begin with. But yeah, it was some shit. That's the best way to
Yeah.
put it.
Wow, that's definitely really interesting, man. I guess my first question, just to circle back a little bit, is what were you doing in Japan? Because you were there for 8 years, right?
Yeah, about seven, 8, kind of. So the short version, my first degree was in Japanese. What do you do with the degree in
Uh-huh.
Japanese? I don't know either. So I moved to Japan. I started teaching the English and doing
Okay.
small jobs translating. And because I was in a band, one thing led to another. It led me to singing on the video game Final Fantasy X, which
Oh yeah.
some people might have heard of that. So if you, for the listener out there, if you're interested in hearing what I sound like, put on the Final Fantasy X or Final Fantasy X soundtrack, and I'm
Hmm.
I'm that voice that's doing the theme song. And I guess a smart person would have figured out a way to capitalize on that, but instead,
Hmm.
almost immediately after that was released, I went home and joined the military. Uh, so I did not capitalize on that. If anything,
Wow.
I guess doing a band now is my way of circling back to something that I wish I had uh, done more with, like 20 years ago. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was some crazy stuff too. Uh,
That's cool as hell. I'm a huge fan of Final Fantasy. I grew up playing like all those games and everything. I even have a Kingdom Hearts tattoo on my
oh,
leg.
rad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually just got that done like 2 months ago. Um, but yeah, I've been a lifelong fan. So when I saw that on your Instagram, I was like immediately like I was just so curious. Like, how did you, I guess, find the Final Fantasy like the Square team to do that in the first place?
It completely an accident. It's sometimes who you know, and then maybe sometimes it's attitude. So a friend of mine, his friend had worked at Square and had something to do with the production of the song. I believe he wrote the song it's the Alexander O. Smith, I guess the guy who wrote the song.
Hmm.
And so he was hanging out with my friend Piper. Shout out to Piper. And we just happened, they just happened to go to the same curry restaurant that me and the other guys in my old band Till I Die were at, and we were assembling cassette tapes. In which, for the listeners who don't remember what a cassette tape was, that was like a CD back in the
Hmm.
day. I'm sure everybody knows what cassette tape is. But anyway, when you were assembling it, you would have to cut this liner into this thing that you could fold around the cassette and then put it in this dinky little plastic container thing
Hmm.
for the cassette. So we were assembling this. It was like me and two other guys from the band, and Piper walked by and was like, "Hey, what's up?" And I was like, "Oh, we just put out a demo." And I don't know if the Final Fantasy Squaresoft dude uh, mentioned that he was from that. I think he said, "Oh, I'd be interested in hearing the band." And I said, "Well, you could buy a tape." And so I charged him 200 yen on the spot for a tape. And then months later, he emailed me and was like, "Hey, would you be interested in trying out for this thing?" And I'm positive I didn't take any of it seriously, and that might have
Hmm.
helped because like I showed up for the interview, not knowing it was an interview.
Hmm.
Square Enix in Japan was a gigantic plaza. It wasn't just a building, but it was a super building, and it felt like
Hmm.
something out of the movie Akira. But the whole thing was dedicated to Square, and I showed up like and I think I was going to go skate afterwards. So I showed up in something that I would skate in,
Hmm.
skateboard in hand, skate shoes. I was probably wearing jeans that were too big for me and like a shirt which may or may not have had something offensive on it. And like just showed up like that. And it wasn't until I was actually with the executives that I think I realized, oh man, if like conventionally, if I was trying to get the job in an interview, I would have blown that shit because everything that they asked me, I told them probably what they didn't want to hear, and I looked like they didn't want me to look. They asked, "Hey, this is going to be a major production." I think they were expecting it to sell millions of copies. It went on to sell like 14 million copies.
Yeah.
Are you interested in doing a professional production? I said no. Like I'm punk rock all the way, DIY till I die. And they were just like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? And then they played me the song, which at that point was like keyboard, like dink, 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 dink. They're like, what do you think of this? I was like, not much. Like, and I speak Japanese. So, I mean, I told them to their face, I was like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'm what you're looking for. They're like, well, we're also considering there to have some rap in the middle of the song. What do you think about that? I was like, that's not for me either. I said,
Hmm.
you want some yelling, screaming, maybe some angry talking. I'm not doing any rap. The world doesn't need more white dude rap. And I think they were just, if anything, maybe they were blown away by attitude because maybe I think I had the confidence of like, well, I mean, the confidence of a 20-something-year-old who doesn't really give a shit and wasn't trying very hard. Maybe it was that attitude, and maybe it was they just had never heard anyone like scream the way that I was doing back in the day.
Hmm.
And they hadn't really thought of that for the song. I think they had originally thought like Guns N' Roses meets Metallica, and the
Hmm.
music is like that. And then when they heard my voice, they were like, it's just like more intense than they were actually expecting, and I think they just rolled the dice on it.
Dude.
And it's funny that something that I randomly did as a 20-something-year-old is probably going to be the thing that I get remembered for. Of all the crazy things that I do in my life, of all the places that I go speak and do stuff, that's going to be the thing that has a Wikipedia page on it.
That is a crazy coincidence, though. Like, I feel like that just like does not happen in general. Like that, that's nuts.
I sort of to plug the reason to travel and to get outside your comfort zone. I seriously think, even in the internet age, there's a handful of places where if you want something amazing to happen, it's worth moving to. So,
Mhm.
places that I would say in America, the top would be New York or LA. You want something amazing to happen, you should be there. Maybe if you're just in computers, Silicon Valley in California or in Austin, Texas would be places to be. And outside that, I would say Paris, Milan, Tokyo. These are places like brimming with opportunity. There's always going to be opportunity there. And if you're someone who's like, I want something amazing to happen, you got to go somewhere amazing to do it. I mean,
Hmm.
uh, I love Philadelphia. I love like it's cool that you're from there too. I love our hometown, but as far as like brimming with opportunity, there's so many charming parts about Philadelphia, but I don't know if it has that kind of opportunity. There's like 10 spots in the world that just have that. Unfortunately, there's
Hmm.
a lot of negative to move to somewhere in demand too. I mean, New York and LA, there's like rife with problems, but for
Hmm.
that opportunity to like when you got one shot like Eminem says, be somewhere amazing and you're going to have a better chance of doing something amazing.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, I've been living in New York City for going on 13 years now. I moved out for a little bit during COVID and such, but overall, and I will say, like, you could do anything here. I mean, like it's one of the biggest cities in the whole world, and pretty much like as long as you're willing to get out there and meet people and work hard, I mean, you could really make it here. But if you're not one of those people, it's fucking hard because it's also
Oh,
really
I believe it.
expensive. Yeah, it's really expensive, and rent is a lot, food's a lot. Like, but yeah, like for people who like that and they're down for that and they have a lot of energy, it's great here. It's just definitely not everyone's cup of tea. But I completely agree that like if you want to make something happen, like get out to a big city. Maybe for anyone who's listening who's like younger and has a lot of aspirations, or it doesn't matter about age really, as long as you just want to make it happen, right? That's a great idea.
But generally speaking, when you're younger, in my opinion, when you're younger, like anywhere between early 20s to sometime in your mid to late 30s, you should do something hard. You should challenge yourself. You should try to be somewhere where there's a lot of opportunity. Because as you
Hmm.
get older and to where you're like my age, where you're like, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to work, and there's only a few more things I can add in a day till I just have to sit and play video games or do nothing. You should be doing something amazing because when you get super old, all you're going to be doing is eating some soup. And you don't want to have any regrets. You don't want to have any regrets in life. Get out, do something amazing. New York is one of those places. I've often
Hmm.
thought, and feel free to steal it, everyone. I like New York, and I would like to make a shirt that says "I like New York" because I don't love New York, but I like it, and there's an undeniable energy that's in New York.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
if you, yeah,
I'm just gonna say people are out until like like 6 a.m. and stuff here. Like they go out on a Friday night, they go to like clubs and stuff. Like they're
oh
not
yeah.
going home till 6 a.m. sometimes. It really is true. It is like a city that just doesn't go to sleep. People are always out.
When I used to go clubbing, and this is again like a thing I did in my 20s, while I was still in punk rock bands and going to metal shows and stuff, we
Yeah,
would go to a club and then we would go to an after hours club that didn't open until 5. And like,
yeah,
so
yeah.
we'd be out from 10 at night till maybe 7 or 8 in the morning.
Hmm.
And absolutely ridiculous, but ridiculously fun. And that stuff's not going to be available to you if you're in Idaho, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah.
Nothing against Idaho. I've been to Boise and it's nice, but I don't think they have that as much. Whereas New York, obviously, you have that. Tokyo, you have that. LA, LA's not as. I'm sure they have that, but I think that's more of a in New York and Tokyo,
Hmm.
and I'm sure in Paris they have that.
So I'm going to Tokyo and I guess a couple spots in Japan later this year. Um, Wondering, what do you think about like, is there anything you have to do there? Like, how's like the vegan scene out there? Is there vegan food? Is it hard to eat vegan?
Yes to all of it. My first thing I would say is make sure that you have downloaded the Happy Cow app. My
Hmm.
second thing that I would say is make sure you do some research. Have like a restaurant or two picked out in any city that you go to that has designated vegan stuff. And then also know, hey, when I go to say that revolving sushi place, the Kaiten
Hmm.
sushi, I can eat, these are the things on the menu that I can eat. If you go to 7-Eleven or Lawson or Family Mart or Circle K, here's the things that I could eat. Believe it or not, while Japan is expensive with the way the dollar and the yen exchange, it
Hmm.
is a cheap vacay. And I love Japan. You're gonna have the time of your life for sure.
I'm excited. Anything that you could recall off the top of your head that is still around that you would be like, yo, you got to go there?
I would say, let me see. Are you looking specifically at restaurants, experiences? I mean,
Experiences, yeah, mostly experiences, I would say.
are you just going to Tokyo, or are you also going to go to Osaka, Kyoto, Nara?
I think Osaka and Kyoto are on the
Uh,
list.
you would do Osaka, Kyoto, Nara. That would take maybe 4 days. If you Tokyo, I would say 2 days, grand total of 1 week. You can extend that experience into, you know, awesome maybe like maybe like off the beaten path stuff. There's a ton of that, but you bare minimally want 2 to 3 days in Tokyo because you're gonna probably land in Tokyo and
Uh-huh.
well, you'd probably land in Nara or not sorry, Narita or Haneda airport, and then you would spend 2 to 3 days in Tokyo. You would do, let me see, Harajuku, Shibuya, Shinjuku, maybe Akihabara. I would say that you would want 2 or 3 days in Tokyo, and like I said before, three days, 4 days in Osaka, Nara, and Kyoto. Na- Kyoto is like 1.5 days. Nara is 1.5 days. Osaka is about 1.5 days. Really good vegan food in Kyoto and in Osaka.
Mm.
Nara, it's more for the Daibutsu, the big Buddha, and going through the deer park. That
Hmm.
could be, you could do that for a day. You might want to stay in Kyoto and then do Osaka and Nara as day trips, or do vice versa for whatever's cheaper.
Okay. That sounds great.
Also,
Yeah.
also to plug it, Tokyo Disneyland is super cheap compared to Disney here in the States. It's
Hmm.
like, I wouldn't say fire sale cheap, but measurably cheaper. And they have vegan options in the park.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Sweet.
I live an hour and a half drive from Disneyland, but here it's like you have to have tickets in advance and it's $200+.
Hmm.
There it's maybe a third of that. It's like $70, and they have at least when I was there a year and a half ago, they had a vegan curry that you could get pretty much anywhere. That was
Hmm.
cheaper than food you would get here, and that was like food in the park. It was absolutely awesome.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks for the tips. I'm definitely gonna go back to this recording and check that out again when I'm heading over there. Um, so just to get back on your story here.
Yeah.
So you headed back from Japan after your whole experience there, and I know there's like way more we could talk about there. I'm very interested in a lot of that, but just for the sake of time, you ended up in the military, right? So, or I guess you're doing like nursing work, was it EMT?
I was a combat medic. So,
Okay.
medics, Army medics, and I would think corpsmen are very, very similar as from what the corpsmen that I've known. Your license is basically an EMTB, but then you go through this crash course after you get your EMT license. That's basically like, what kind of random stuff could we teach you that you'd effectively be able to learn? So, we're I wouldn't say, because I as a registered nurse, I generally know what paramedics do, and I wouldn't say that an army medic is equal to a paramedic, but you have a scope of practice that's absolutely insane in that now, as a registered nurse, I literally have to call the doctor. I mean, I guess I could do whatever
Hmm.
I wanted, but I am legally am going to have to call the doctor, about something like even putting oxygen at 2 liters on a patient. I should be calling the doctor and telling them that, or asking what the diet is, patient's diet is, before I give them something to eat. Um, I joke. I mean, we joke that literally you have to get a doctor's order to put a band-aid on a patient. That is obviously not true. I would put a band-aid on the patient, but it's really limited scope. As an army medic, it's basically, if you don't know how to do it, you better figure it out fast. That's your scope of practice. Like, I learned how to do stitches on someone as I was doing the stitches. They were walking me through it, and I think I was stitching someone's hand, and then I did
Wow.
stitch someone's face. Uh, uh, you just learn. In downrange, or while I was in Afghanistan, we had plenty of people who had injuries, and so I just went through a clinic and did stitches on anyone who had a wound, and that's how I got better at doing stitches. Plenty of people who are shot up, stabbed up, blown up, and plenty of work to do like that. It
Jeez.
really is insane. But I mean, there's many, many ways to learn, and I think the whole learn by doing, there's something to be said about it.
Yeah. I I'm sure you've had some absolutely insane stories with all that. Like I can't even imagine. And Like, first of all, I want to say, thank you so much for what you've done and everything. Like, that's amazing. And it goes to show a lot about who you are, too. Like, you grew up and you went vegan and vegetarian at a young age, and you went back overseas to America and served in the military, helping people. Like, that shows a lot that you're very empathetic and you care a lot about people. And I think that's amazing, man. Like, so thank you a lot. Like, I mean, that's incredible. You've done amazing work, obviously.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And then for your experiences with being vegan in the army, I'm curious about that. I assume that wasn't very easy, right?
No, and people sometimes ask like the way they put it too, like, hey, did the army cater for you while you were in the military? Um, no, of course not. I think there's this concept of either you get special treatment like in a good way, like somebody's going to bring me my food like if you were on a plane and you ordered a vegan meal and you would get that and you would eat a delicious meal while everyone else is getting the slop. It's the other way around. You get the worst in but it's also not the bad way. I think people had this concept that I would be singled out and then they would find out that I was vegan and try to feed me meat. It wasn't that either. It was
Mm-hmm.
just they were like, "Oh, you're vegan? I don't even know what that is, and I don't give a shit."
Mm-hmm.
There it is. Some ways, I had an advantage in that, and I have plenty of stories of being vegan in the basic training and being vegan and while I was in other trainings or being vegan in Afghanistan. But I'm just left with feeling, how to put it, that at least I had a vegan MRE. The number 12 bean burrito was vegan, except for the pound cake. Everything in the whole MRE, which for those that don't know, when we get rations when we're in the field, we get something called a meal ready to eat, an MRE.
Mm-hmm.
And at least the bean burrito was vegan. Later, they changed that out, and there were no vegan actual entrees in any of the MREs. And then we had to do what we call rat fuck the MREs, which means you go through, you take anything that's vegan, and you throw the rest out.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, that left me with, bringing some of my own food to the field, and then
Mm-hmm.
rat fucking the rest of the MREs. And that's not really it's not really, well, it's wasteful, and it's not only wasteful, it's not really efficient, and it's not really a good scenario.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to get back to having a vegan MRE, and I think that would be good not only for the men and women in our armed services, but as a good recruiting tool in that, hey, like if you want to be vegan, have at it. You could be vegan in the military. Because the truth of the matter is, it is still difficult. And if we're going to feed
Mm-hmm.
prisoners special meals, and if upon request that are vegan, I believe we should also afford our men and women in uniform vegan meals upon request.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Um, was anybody else that you're around vegetarian or vegan?
Generally not. I knew somebody in airborne school and then later in the 173rd who was vegetarian, but she
Mm-hmm.
was more like a flexitarian, a really good person, but like more like a flexitarian. I think
Mm-hmm.
most people that I met were just blown away that by the audacity.
Mm-hmm.
Later, when I was in Afghanistan and I went on anysoldier.com and, you know, sent out basically an SOS for vegan food, people were just blown away that anyone would be, you know, I guess you could put it, anyone would care enough to be vegan in the military, but also
Mm-hmm.
anyone would have the audacity to try to do something obviously as stupid as that. And you know, and people were very generous and sent me a whole bunch of stuff while I was deployed, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, literally kept my ass alive, and I really appreciated that.
Wow. Did you lose a lot of weight while you were there? Like, 'cause you didn't have much food?
So I lost about 20 pounds in basic training.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I said, it's not like anyone's forcing you to eat meat. It's because
Uh-huh.
there are almost no vegan options. So like,
Right.
there'd be unlimited cornflakes with no plant milk. So and that would be breakfast. So how many packets or bowls of dry cornflakes can you eat? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I generally 1.5 is where I'm at.
Hmm.
Then toward the end I would start putting fruit cocktail on it just to soften it up so it would go down better.
Yeah.
And and for those who haven't tried it, don't. It's gross, man. And don't you don't want to do that. Lunch
Doesn't
might
sound very
be,
good.
yeah, lunch would be like Wonder Bread, which is vegan. Is it healthy? No, with condiments and iceberg lettuce on it. And then
Hmm.
dinner would be some dry white rice because if it wasn't dry white rice, that would have meant that they had butter or something else in it. And then vegetables if they weren't cooked in butter, and then another
Hmm.
piece of bread. And that's a surefire way to lose weight and to not feel good. Um, Weirdly, the longer I was in the military, the easier it got. Well, not weirdly, because I had rank, and at a certain point, I was able to kind of, especially as a platoon medic, I could then say, okay, I'm bringing stuff with me. I'm sending stuff to myself. I could put myself in a position and more advantageous position for food. Like say, hey, I'm going to eat here. I'm going to eat there. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I think if I had been more like not a platoon medic, where doing my own thing and not having rank at that point, I was a sergeant. And if I was like a private kind of going under somebody, having to do whatever people were telling me to do, it might have been harder. Having some rank and being also self-directed meant I was able to self-cater to a more extent.
Hmm.
But yeah, generally speaking, it was rough, and it's still kind of rough. I was just talking to two lieutenants in the Marine Corps
Hmm.
the other day, and it still sounds like it sucks to suck.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, I really do think that we could fix it relatively easily, having the vegetarian MRAs be vegan.
Hmm.
Um, the flip side, though, to be fair, is the military is not a place for people of thin of skin or faint of heart.
Yeah.
Like it's some difficult shit,
Hmm.
and they purposely break you down to the point where you're not as fussy about stuff.
Hmm.
And also, to be fair, I wasn't really fussy going in the military, and after I started getting enough food, I really didn't care as much. Like it basically felt like camping, but for 4 years.
Yeah. Right. I have a friend who was in the Navy for a while, and she was saying she pretty much just ate white rice like all the time, and apparently she lost a ton of weight too.
It's one of those things that it all depends on where you are, like, and what you're doing. And sometimes branch, I think it's going to be easier for those that are considering this ridiculous journey into the military as a vegan. It's going to be easier in, I would say, easiest in the Air Force slash Chair Force,
Hmm.
then maybe Space Force, Coast Guard, perhaps, Navy, perhaps, and then Army. It's going to depend on what your job is. The crazier your job, like the closer you get to any kind of special operations kind of stuff, the
Hmm.
more difficult it is. The less likely people are going to be cool with you. You doing some hippie shit, which, I mean, to be fair, like, when I was trying out to be a ranger, uh, that was almost exactly not the place for to be like a fussy eater, a vegan. I think in day one of brief, when I tried out for being a ranger, they said, "Men, rangers are not soldiers. Rangers are motherfucking killers." And they're like, "What's your question?" Everybody gets to ask a question. And my
Hmm.
question was, "First Sergeant, are vegan options available?" The dude just said, "Vegans are motherfucking killers," and my mind is, "Hey, I want to know what my vegan treats options are." So clearly, even after at that point, I was like 4 months in of brainwashing, and it still had not washed my brain enough. Which
what was the response to that?
I I think the guy almost choked on a laugh. And he goes, well, we have vegetarian MREs, so that's your answer. And I said, oh, Roger that, First Sergeant. Which I think I knew what a ridiculous thing I was asking, but I mean, as you could guess, that was first and foremost in my brain. What the fuck? What am I going to be able to eat here?
Yeah, that
Uh,
makes sense.
and the guys that I was with, were pretty cool about it. They would throw me in the vegetarian MRE. I would cut that open, but and throw back a pound cake. And they would. The downside is we would do this exchange because you have like 5 minutes you have to eat.
Uh huh.
Uh, Everybody would, if they would throw me the vegetarian MRE and someone would eat the pound cake or whatever I couldn't eat in there.
Uh huh.
The downside is people would throw their candy at me, which you would think, oh, that's kind of nice. No, it's not. Like they had this really shitty candy called Charms, which if you've ever been in the military, you'll know what Charms are. It's basically this shitty hard candy that
Like
comes up.
Smarties?
No, it's a thick package. It's basically like Starburst except not chewy. Ah, it's like that. Starburst except not delicious, not chewy, and also they are vegan, unlike Starburst, which are not. If you've ever watched Generation Kill, they bring it up in Generation Kill. Just a plug for that show.
Hmm.
And they would throw me packages of them, and so I would be stuffing these candies in my mouth, and boy, that shit was gross. Many things I did not enjoy in the military, and that was definitely one of them.
Oh man, that's crazy that even the candy was that bad. Um, I want to hear a little more just for the. I think we have to kind of treat this whole episode as like a bit of an overview. I would
Yeah,
love to get into more specifics if you'd ever want to come on again, but for the sake of time, I'd love to hear about what happened. So you went into the RN work after the military, right?
correct.
Okay, so I'm assuming that like your work as an EMT in the army was what led you into that next step, right?
Correct. So the bridge, I guess. So I got out of the military in 2006 with the plan of opening a vegan restaurant.
Oh wow.
And I remember standing in formation. We had just gotten back from Afghanistan. We did this like whole ceremony for the guys that had died from our unit. And then they were going around to us, what are your plans from now and who's getting out of the military? And so some first sergeant or I think colonel goes, what are your plans? You staying in, son? I said, no, sir. I'm getting out to start a vegan restaurant. And this guy goes, what the fuck? And just like he looked like he was gonna just break some shit. And so I did get out. I went to a vegan culinary program up in Massachusetts, and I was looking around for a spot to start a restaurant. And then, unfortunately for me, this was 2008, and the economy was tanking, and restaurants and were closing. It was basically like COVID was for restaurants minus the germs. Uh, and so I was like, well, what am I going to do next? And I just couldn't figure out what to do to make that next step when, as luck would have it, I guess, the universe has a way of pointing you in a direction. There was a big earthquake in Haiti, and I was recruited to be the medical asset for an NGO to spend a couple weeks in Haiti. And that got me to think about going back in the military. I was just like, I hadn't had an experience like that well, I guess at that point I hadn't done anything medical in like 3 years. And I was taking out stitches. I was doing IVs. I hadn't done any prep work. I just randomly went on this mission, and then all of a sudden I had to remember how to do all this stuff again. Then I was like, you know what? I kind of guess this is a calling. Like it's not the calling I thought I was going to have for my life, but here I am. And then that got me to think, well, maybe I'll go back to school and become an RN. And I I got a job working as a nursing assistant first. I took my prereqs out here in LA. I went back home and I went to Drexel and got my nursing degree at Drexel
Hmm.
and bada boom bada bing. 10 years later, I'm still an RN working for the VA.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Do you still do any of the stuff that you've done with the culinary school? Like, do you cook a lot?
So I do cook a lot because, as every vegan, I have to eat. I had planned on opening a restaurant when I first went through all that experience, and then that basically, not to segue to my books, but that all that information went into to writing Vegan Strong, and I have a recipe section in there.
Hmm.
And then I guess those experiences helped build on me as being I guess being a speaker or whatever the fuck. And so
Yeah.
I use that to write Vegan Strong, and then also my kids' book, Adventure of the Sergeant Piggy, and eventually,
Hmm.
I guess my feelings about veganism and the world led to me writing my first novel, Dead Meat,
Hmm.
and here we are.
What got so like I know I know we're already closing in an hour here, but I'm very interested in how were you always into writing? Like what led you to the writing stuff? No.
So I think it was a feeling of like, oh man, like I had spent all this time preparing to do something with veganism. What do I do with it?
Hmm.
And it was that push. And at one point, I kind of remembered, oh, yeah, at one point, I had kind of as a kid wanted to be a writer. And then
Hmm.
the other thing was this feeling I've had, and probably since I went vegan, of the problem with veganism is PR. And if I could do anything with veganism, it would be to work on the PR, which I feel like a lot of us now, or more of us, are doing. You're doing that with showing a non-wimpy vegan to people. When people think vegan, they have this picture that the media have made of
Hmm.
like, oh, we don't lift, we're skinny, we're this, that, and the other. We look like we're a strong wind will knock us over. Um, so I think I thought, I really wanted to use my desire to be a writer that I had as a kid, plus all
Hmm.
this information that I've developed over the years, to kind of help push back against those narratives that vegans are wimpy, crazy, whatever, and just say like, hey, dude, we're just people like everyone else. We just
Hmm.
think it sucks to kill animals and destroy the planet for no reason. And
Yeah.
I think, as a good friend of mine once said, most people are basically vegan other than a few things. And I think
Hmm.
they're right. If you ask people, is it okay to abuse animals? I think 99% of the population is going to say no. If you
Yeah.
say, ask somebody, hey, is it okay to rape an animal? People are going to be like, of course not. But then what is milk? What is dairy? That's basically
Yeah.
you're raping an animal for that. For, that whole animal ag is basically just built on that. But if you
Hmm.
ask them, is the act of doing that to an animal okay? Nobody, I repeat, nobody is going to say okay. Maybe a serial
Hmm.
killer here and there will be like, oh no, I'm cool with it. But
Yeah.
no one else is going to say they're cool with it. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important to consider.
Hmm. That's a good point. I think the underlying values are there. Like I agree. I think it's just people don't like the change, right? Like the taste is what people grew up with. Like they like the taste of chicken tenders, things like that. And I get it. Like so did I. It's not easy to give that stuff up, but I think it just we grow up in this culture where it's normalized and people don't really want to change. It's very hard, so it leads them just to try to justify how they already are.
Agree. Change is hard. I think when you when you embrace the fact that life is nothing more than change, it
Hmm.
becomes easier. I understand the feeling of not wanting to change. It's difficult, and they're not wrong to feel that it's annoying that that's something that vegans are asking them to do. And I think really, as time goes on, we'll get better and better at outreach of
Hmm.
ways to talk to people. Because really, what it comes down to is just being able to explain this in ways that I think people understand and that resonate. and that's a little less attacky. Because when we first started, it was all angry. You're doing this. Meat is murder. In
Uh-huh.
very not savvy way of getting part or getting our ideas over to people. But I think as
Mm-hmm.
time goes on, we're getting better and better. Now, with I'm sure it looked like a couple years ago, like the whole world was going vegan when Beyond Meat stock was soaring, and
Yeah.
now that vegan restaurants seem like they're closing, and it's changing. But I'm sure you heard the news, and it's if you haven't, podcast listener, Starbucks has just eliminated their plant milk upcharge, and I
That's
think
huge too.
yeah, I think it's always going to be a couple steps forward, a couple steps
Mm-hmm.
back, and we just keep plugging away at it. And maybe not this generation, maybe not next generation, but once we hit double digits, I think that's where the real growth is going to happen, where more and more of us are something. Because when I started, I mean, I'm sure you could have, well, you couldn't have literally counted on your hands how many vegans there were in the world, but there weren't that many of us, and it was not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now it clearly is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as compared to most other social justice movements, this movement has grown exponentially in my lifetime and will get
Yeah.
even better.
That's great. I was actually going to ask you to kind of bring everything together here full circle, like how things have changed from when you first went vegan versus now. But I feel like you kind of wrapped that up pretty succinctly. So that was a great segue. And I think just to kind of bring things home here, just for the sake of time, because I feel like going too much over an hour for a podcast is where it
Yeah, it's
starts
too
to.
much.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd love to hear some of the goals that you have for the future, maybe, and then I'd love to wrap up with like some maybe a piece of advice from everything you've experienced for maybe like younger people, maybe people who just went vegan, things like that. So let's start with any goals you have for the future.
I'm going to continue, like it or not, to write more books. I'm going to be putting out my book that's going to talk about my experiences in Japan in probably the next year or two. It's already written. I'm just in the editing phase for that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably write another book or two on being vegan, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be moving toward more fiction and nonfiction. As far as goals, personal goals, I want to do more speaking, both and hit every state in America, and also start speaking abroad. As far as advice, I got a couple of things, especially for newer vegans.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, be easy on yourself. When we usually get into something like this, people go all in, and going all in is great. I'm totally with it. I do all things like that too. But you got to take it easy on yourself. If you slip, it's not the end of the world. And even, like now, being vegan at 32 years in is not an issue. Now it's more of an issue of I try to stay in a calorie deficit, and I try to hit my macro goals every day.
Mm-hmm.
But liken it to that, if I have a day like yesterday, I had some cookies. Were they vegan? Of course they were. But did that kind of ruin my macro goals for the day? Not really, but it wasn't helping my calorie deficit eating some
Mm-hmm.
cookies. I took it easy on myself. And if for some reason or other you slip, you're out somewhere, you do something, don't take it as a one bad day means that you're not vegan anymore, that you can't, have a better day tomorrow. Uh, Along the same lines, um, don't think that just because you're vegan now, you can't eat a meal with friends, family, you can't go out. No, don't start to lose friends or family over this. It's besides the fact that it's not the best way to get other people to be vegan if you then cut yourself off from friends and family. It's not good for you. You want your friends in your life, you want your family in your life. You don't need to make a whole new friend group just because you're vegan. Just, I would say, with that, when you go out with others to eat, do some research online, find out where you could find a good Beyond Burger, good Impossible Burger. And because most places have that these days, you're not going to be in the same spot I might have been, where you're just eating a crummy salad somewhere. You can find a really good option. And lastly, just remember that this movement needs more people that are positive. This movement needs more people that are into it, but in the right way. And by that, I mean, if you think about what sells products on TV, it's not negativity, it's not hatred, and it's not anger. It's positivity. It's people jazzed or super positive about the thing. And if you think about veganism as a product, we're trying to sell that too to people, but not in the, what doesn't work is the meat is murder, you're evil for this, you're bad, but hey, you should do this because it's great for you. It tastes good and it's better for the animals and better for the planet. And if what you're doing makes you happy, you look good, and you're healthy, that right there is going to attract other people to doing it, even if they were at first pushing back on it. But if you push people and you put people in a corner, then you're going to have the family members who are double down and do the whole I'm eating more meat to kind of make up for this, that kind of silliness. And you don't need that. And just having the right frame of mind will help. Also, lastly, always have a plan. If you go out, have Happy Cow. If you travel, have some restaurants to go to. Also, bring a snack. Never put yourself in a position where you're like, well, fuck, I'm starving. There's nothing to eat. No, if you always have a plan for things, it becomes easier to stick with being vegan or your diet.
Yeah. I could not agree more with every single thing you said there. I think you worded that really great and really, really directly. So, so great knowledge there, man. I appreciate you sharing that. So where can people connect with you and find you on social media, or any of your businesses, things like that?
Thank you very much for that question. The easiest way to find me is online, sergeantvegan.com. That's sgtvegan.com. I'm also sgt_vegan on Instagram and sgtvegan on Facebook. If someone goes onto my website and sends me a direct message, goes right to my email, I will also check Instagram, and that's really easy to see. Facebook, I look at maybe not as much, especially if someone comments on a post. It's probably not super likely that I'll see it, but yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, man. I would love to have you back on again if you're ever interested. I feel like you've such an interesting life. Like, you've done so much cool stuff, and I feel like we could have talked about like way more things there. Also, I feel like we have a ton in common. Like, I grew up my whole life skateboarding, into video games, all that kind of stuff. So I could talk about that all day.
Well, it was great talking to you too, and maybe we'll save that for a music episode or a punk rock episode or something like that.
That'd be awesome, man. Cool. Well, thank you, and hang out for like just a couple minutes after. I'm just gonna close out the recording here, and for anyone else listening, thank you guys for listening, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ethics Approach podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, I'd really appreciate if you gave the podcast a follow anywhere where you're listening to this, and dropping a review if you liked it. Please also feel free to check out the Ethics Approach website for additional content, including coaching services, free training programs, articles, and merch, as well as the Ethics Fitness YouTube. Feel free to also check out my personal fitness Instagram, which can be found at Tofu Strong, for updates and even more content. And of course, dropping a like, commenting, and sharing is always hugely appreciated and is a quick, easy, and free way to help me producing more content like this. Thank you so much again to my Ethics Fitness community. Much love, as always, and I'll see you again in the next episode soon. Peace out.